All right, everybody. Well, hey, welcome to normal note night in America. For some of you guys on the real estate side used to seeing us, welcome. For those of you guys that are used to join me on Wednesday nights for our mass media podcast mastermind, we're honored to have you guys here. But I think you'll understand why I bumped this up a couple nights. We are really excited to have a very special guest who's got something amazing going on here, and I think many of you all will take advantage of this. I think it's more important than ever of what Corey has put together for you to take a little bit of time, especially out of the next couple of days, to really kind of tap into this, to really do some amazing things. But we're really excited to have you join us here, Corey. If you don't know Corey Poirier, he is a TED Talk expert, but also just an absolute expert on getting your message out, whether it's public speaking, books, podcasts. That's where we know each other from, fellow New Media Summit icon, and I was kind enough to be on his podcast. We had him on a while back as well about getting your message out. But in today's society, especially with not only real estate investors, marketers, Corey, I think you would agree we're all in the media business these days, no matter what type of message we're trying to send, right?
Yeah, 100%. I believe that we're all, whether we want to or not, creating our own mini media brands. And the difference now probably, Scott, is it's like we're all serving pockets of people versus just one sort of mass media serving the many. And so, yeah, I think we're all, like I say, for better or worse, just like customer service, whether you believe you're delivering customer service or not, you still are. And so if you don't know, you're probably not delivering the greatest experience. So same thing with the media. If you are, and this is the key thing, if you put yourself out there, then yes, you are a little mini media magnet, and you have to decide, are you going to be conscious about that or not? But yeah, my shorter answer is yes, I believe we all are sort of in the media now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not just 3 channels sitting in front of your TV, listening to the radio, or one of 3. We've got so many to choose from, and social media, and it's just gotten easier to get your word out. And in the words of one of my favorite authors, Seth Godin, everybody is out there is looking for a tribe or a voice to follow. We've all got different tribes, like you said, media things. But before we dive in a little bit what you got going, why don't you share a little bit of background and kind of who you are for our audience that's kind of new to who you are, and we'll discuss why it's so important that they showed up tonight.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I guess my backstory, very, very short version, because it could be a long one if I wanted it to be. So backstory really is I grew up in a small little tiny town. That's all subjective because I know people that grew up in town with 20 people. Well, mine wasn't that small, but it was like 3,000. So still not very big. And we're on an island, so kind of separated from other people. But I grew up in this small little town. I was raised by a single mother. And I'll add this in and I'll explain perhaps later why, but I barely graduated high school. And when I say that, a teacher gave me a 49+1. So it's important to know that means I didn't technically graduate. The teacher gave me the 1% to allow me to graduate. And I finished high school without knowing the difference between fiction and nonfiction. And I didn't read my first book until I was age 27. And so, that I always tell people, not always, but I often tell people that part of my story because it sets the tone for everything else, in the sense that I hear a lot of people saying, well, either I'm not as lucky as you, I'm not as fortunate as you, I didn't come from the same background. Well, when you're raised by a single mother, the boys club was my way to actually play sports. I mean, it's not like I had excess money or she had excess money kicking around. So we didn't have the money side. And then, like I said, whenever I graduated high school, a teacher gave me 1%. So it wasn't like I was, an academic or anything like that. I did do well in business college when I moved on to that stage, but it's just important, I think, to let people know it doesn't matter where you start, it's what you do next. And then I guess to take 15 years into about 1 minute, basically I spent about 10 years in the corporate world of sales, 5 years with Toshiba Canada, and so selling photocopiers door to door. If anybody wants to try that, I can hook you up. And then 5 years with Konica Minolta. So basically same industry as Canon and Xerox. I spent 10 years in that corporate world, first as a salesperson, then as a manager. And then ultimately I decided to go out on my own. By way of being tricked into stand-up comedy, I found my way ultimately onto stages speaking. And that's sort of where everything sort of changed. But to finish this whole story off, Scott, I got into speaking. Ultimately launched a newspaper, which allowed me to interview high achievers. I got obsessed by interviewing people. You can see my cat trying to say hello. Tantra, say hi. So I got obsessed by interviewing people and learning about them. And ultimately, that's sort of, I guess, the rest, as they say, is history, because that led to books, that led to speaking on stages, and it led to interviewing people, which obviously ties into podcasting. So hopefully that's kind of a well-rounded, what was that, in 2 minutes overview.
Yeah, that's pretty good for squeezing in, just 40 years of your life there a little bit for the most part, and doing some things. But it's relevant, and I'm glad you brought up the early part of aspect of things, is that it doesn't matter where you begin, it's what you do with your time and what you do with your energy. We deal with that with real estate. We deal with that with so many in the podcasting side and things like that. It was like, look, you can start. You don't have to have it come with this golden or silver spoon in your mouth, all these resources. It's really, if you really have a work ethic and want to put some things in, and it's easier these days to get that kind of that hand up out of that, and help you out of that hole that we sometimes find ourselves in to make things happen, right?
Yeah, and there's a great Zig Ziglar quote. I just seen somebody reference, give the quote credited to Les Brown yesterday, which is kind of ironic because we have an event coming up with Les Brown, and actually Tom Ziglar, so Ziglar's son. So maybe this is a synchronicity. But the quote, I believe, is Zig Ziglar's. That's where I've seen it credited most. And he said something along the lines of, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to become great.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, I think that's the key thing. You have to start. And so many people get this comfort zone issue where it'll mean stepping outside my comfort zone. And why would I bother? Because I'm not good enough, or somebody else had an advantage that I didn't have. But again, back to that original point, there's lots of proof that says, as you've done probably with interviews, there's lots of interviews I've done, hundreds, with people that really shouldn't be where they are today, but they're still there.
Yeah. And I would say it comes down to a couple of things. One is hustle, for sure. Stickability, not giving up on what you want to accomplish, your dreams, or just sticking to it and overcoming obstacles. You ain't gonna be the smartest person in the room, but you can outwork those. Because I think we see that everywhere. People that come from gifts or skill wasted away. Right now, I'm a huge baseball fan, and I'm so fed up with Major League Baseball, people whining back and forth about the money and issues like that. I'm like, you got all this talent, don't waste it away, when really we as a society really need that kind of, that release, that enjoyment. And you see the other teams getting, the other sporting events getting around things. You see people still making accommodations with everything that's going on in the world these days. Are really, okay, let's pivot. Let's find a way to make things work. And then other people, they're like, well, I got to work a little hard. I'm not going to do that. You mean I got to do something extra? You mean I'm not entitled to success? And we all know that doesn't work that way, right, Corey?
Yeah, I'll add in, and this is, when I say this, it's harder for people that don't know me to see the context of this, but for people that know me, they know when I say this, it's not a dig at anybody, it's not a negative to anybody. It's with love I say this, but people say to me all the time, they'll see a picture of me with so-and-so, insert name here, Bob Proctor, or like I just mentioned, Les Brown, or whoever, Hulk Hogan, or whoever it is. They'll see a picture of me with somebody and they say, oh, you're so lucky to meet these people and that. And my answer internally, and sometimes I say it publicly, sometimes it's just internal, Scott, is if you only knew how much luck went into being lucky, how much work that went into it, how much work it took to become lucky, as they say. And so for me, there's a backstory. I skipped it over, but 20 years building towards being able to sit across from Les Brown. And the truth is, my first year, I wouldn't have been able to. I wouldn't have had the ability. I would have basically ran out of the room probably. And so the point is people see the end result of 20 years and think that that's the beginning. And I'll tell you, I had a comic one time on my show, and I asked him, Mark, what do you think it is that the average person doesn't realize about stand-up comedy? And he said, how much work goes into it to make it look like no work at all goes into it. And to me, that sums up all of this, is that people don't see the 20 years. They just see the 20 minutes that just happened in front of them, and they think, like Gary Vee, oh, overnight success. But Gary Vee, whether you agree with hustle and grind or not, that guy was at 4 a.m. and 3 a.m. on all these forums, talking to people, building up his brand. And he did that for I think it was 8 years. Yeah. And people see him arrive and then say, oh, I want to be Gary Vee. But you know who Eric Thomas is, motivational speaker. He said, you want my life, but you don't want my hustle. You don't want my grind. And that's kind of how it is, right? A lot of people want the end result, but again, it takes work to get there. So back to your original point, there's work involved.
Yeah. Work is a 4-letter word for a lot of people these days for making things happen. But You know, the beautiful thing though is I think we are in such an age where things rapidly are changing so much. And I think so many people have preconceived notions about how difficult. Oh, they do see that. They see the 8 years, or like Damon John is normal saying, you know, from Fubu, he goes, yeah, I was an overnight success that took 8 years.
Right.
You know, showing up. You know, it takes work and failures along the way. It takes stubbing your toes, you know, getting punched in the face, kicked in the shins, or the huevos, whatever you want to say, however you do it. But the point is, you keep failing forward. You're getting better at your craft. I mean, you and I both have spoken publicly in a lot of places, and there have been times that we've killed it, and then other times you can hear crickets in some cases, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, to your point, that's the part that I'll say it this way too. So that's the part people forget is the work, but also you know, the times that you fail and you have those what we call failures, those missteps. But I'll tell you one of the biggest moments for me. It's when I asked myself this question, and I think it's probably somebody's quote, but I kind of took it on and said this is kind of a mantra for me. But I asked myself the question one day after a long time of being focused on the destination. So I'll give you an example. I have, let's see if I do. Yeah, I have a copy of and this is not a show promotion, but I have a copy of my latest book sitting in front of me. And that years ago, when I put a book out, it was all about the book. It was all about holding the book in my hand. But here's the problem with that. And I've found, by the way, a lot of influencers feel the same way, but nobody talks about it, is once you get it in your hand, it's like, next. And it doesn't have that moment you think you work and you keep thinking the next one's going to do it, but they never do. It's like buying another jet and buying a bigger one because you think it's going to fill the void. But here's what I found, and this was the hardest thing to discover, Scott, but the most rewarding, to the point of all what we're saying is, what if, and here's the question I asked myself, what if the journey is really the destination? What if it's about enjoying the journey? So those 8 years that we didn't see Gary Vee hustle, maybe, just maybe, he enjoyed those 8 years. So it doesn't have to be like people go, well, I don't want it to be 8 years of hustle. But if you enjoy the hustle, whatever that is to you, the grind, whatever, if you love what you do, as they say, you'll never work a day in your life. It is a cliche. But again, if you enjoy the journey, then what does it matter how much time it takes? So if you can get to the point where you actually enjoy, if you enjoy writing the book, if you enjoy marketing the book, if you enjoy all the things, if you enjoy chasing the publisher and eventually convincing the publisher to sign you, if you enjoy all that stuff, then it doesn't matter if it takes 5 years or it takes a day.
Yeah, it's true. It's all, the journey is where you learn more about yourself and you hone those skills so that you're exactly right. You finish something, okay. It's like we see that with real estate investors. Okay, yeah, I did my first flip. Okay, let me go to the next one. Let me go to something bigger. Let me go find something along the way. And you have to really enjoy that day in, day out grind. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful long term, no matter what it is. And of course, I think the grind evolves as you grow up and you build notoriety and you take that next step to getting to a new level. You know, you took a big step in getting booked on a couple TED Talks, right? You had to kind of grow into that. And would you take a little bit of time to kind of talk about that, and then also kind of talk about what bLU Talks is, so that our audience who's listening and watching here kind of get a little bit of feel for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So and it's kind of worked out. It wasn't meant to be this way, but it kind of worked out as a happy accident for me, is that TEDx was sort of starting to become a big thing whenever I reached out for my first one. People were saying, you need to do a TEDx talk, but it wasn't so big that I was like, yes, I do. I was just like, okay. But I applied multiple times for the first one, and it wasn't, happening. And so I understand now why people will tell me they spend 2 years applying and don't land it. Of course, there are shortcuts. I mean, I reverse engineered the thing, and people started coming to me saying, how did you do that? But the first one, of course, is always the hardest. But in terms of the TEDx, I ended up delivering 3 over a very short amount of time, and then I retired from the TEDx stage. And people started coming to me saying, how did you do that? So I started helping people and guiding people. But in terms of growing into it, which is the bigger question here, I will say that it's the hardest stage I ever stepped on at that point. When I got on that stage, and I'd already probably spoken maybe 1,500 times, and it was really like the first time. It was like, and I was the guy that was, just covered in sweat, falling over, almost turning shades of color in my first talk. Well, the TEDx it didn't come across like that, but that's how I felt inside again. It was like the first day speaking. It was that tough. And I watched a guy that was over 2,000 talks, and I won't, since I'm not saying his name, I'll say $15,000 keynote, and he dropped the coffee mug. He was shaking so much before delivering his TEDx. Wow. And so I will tell you, for some people, because they realize this is going to be filmed, it's not going to be probably edited. It's going to go air the way it was. And so it's a tough stage to get on. So to your point, I had to grow into it. I wasn't ready when I started speaking. I would have bombed horribly. And I will say it was the 15,000 or 1,500 talks and, whatever it was, 8 years at that point, that got me ready for that. So yeah, you do have to grow into it. So it follows this whole theme of what we're talking about. But I did enjoy the journey. Once again, I enjoyed getting ready for the TEDx. I will say I prepared for it differently than most talks. I probably prepared maybe 50 times going through my presentation. And what that involved is I recorded it as I was driving, because I travel so much. Driving or flying, I would record it over and over and over again in my phone, actually, and then listening back and say, okay, I need to trim that out. The hardest one, my last one, was a 5-minute TEDx talk. And that was tough, to do an actual service in 5 minutes for somebody. So that was tough. And at the same time, and this is going to be my segue into Blue Talks, at the same time, I also recognize that the TEDx talks were actually more responsible in recent years for my bookings than my sizzle reel that I spent a lot of money on. Mm-hmm. And so I started surveying clients and asking why. And there's a couple of elements there. One is because it's such a prestigious thing and it's hard to land one. But I'll tell you a big reason, and a big part of it, is because the person that's hiring you as a speaker looks at that talk, and if it's, say, 5 minutes, they can tell it wasn't edited. So it's you for better or worse. And so I surveyed clients, and they say, well, what they don't like about sizzle reels is you're on for 1 minute, and I might say, peak performers do what nobody else will. Pan to something else. And so what they're saying is, how do we know you didn't bomb for the next 10 minutes after you said that line? Whereas with the TEDx, they usually see it front to back. And in fact, 2 of my TEDx talks helped me because the production's low, production value. So they're like, we know you didn't edit it because you would have prettied that up. And so weird enough, Scott, we tracked it back, and my TEDx talks are responsible for over 100 paid bookings. And so I recognize the power of that, having a branded talk. And so that's one aspect. And then I had students in a speaking program that I had, and actually my TEDx program, coming to me saying, I wish there was a stage where I could talk about spirituality, synchronicity, woo-woo, all that kind of stuff. And there's not. And I said, okay, so I said, well, I got to help my clients. So I'm actually trying to name a place where they can go speak on this, and I couldn't come up with one. And I'm like, why doesn't this exist? But at the same time, I'm a big fan of TEDx, so I like the business stories. I like the life stories. So hence what happened was bLU was born, and what bLU stands for is Business, Life, Universe. That's what the acronym stands for. And really how I define it to people is it's TEDx meets chicken soup for the soul. And so basically, if you picture chicken soup for the soul, inspirational stories, a lot of stuff about healing and synchronicity mixed with TEDx, which is about an idea we're spreading, and bring that on a stage. That's sort of what evolved into Blue Talks. And then now, and we're getting ready to launch, but now we're starting with virtual events, as you know about. We have live stages. We have been to Harvard, San Diego, Western Canada, and run the events. We have a podcast coming out right away, and we have a book series, and they're all dropping basically in the same day other than the virtual events. So that's Blue Talks and my TEDx experience in a nutshell.
Very nice. Well, and that's led to a variety of things: speaking, books, and the audio aspect of things. I kind of call it the 3 senses of you speaking and hearing, and people hearing it, and then also seeing it in a variety of ways there for you. And I think when you can hit people on an emotional level of telling stories and sharing your story. You introduced me just to Mark Victor Hansen and Crystal Dwyer Hansen just recently. They did a great job, and it's passed the word on. And we've run in some similar circles too. I mean, I've known Les for 7 years now. I hung out with him several times. Just an absolute great guy. Tom Ziglar as well too. I mean, we all miss Zig, but Tom's doing a pretty damn good job. Dad would be proud out there. And that's just a few names of things, but you've really taken the bull by the reins and put together something really amazing for those out there that have a different goal. Yeah, we talk about having a book or a podcast or some sort of speaking message, or how you word out, because I think it's more important today to get out in front of your audience in some sort of fashion, maybe not on all 3 phases, but in some sort of fashion to really get the word out. I mean, we just look at what's going on in society and Corona and all of these people getting upset over a variety of different reasons and causes, all very good. but you got to be willing to take the step out to really kind of, as you say, amplify your message. And so that's when you reached out to me, I was like, oh yeah, let's get you on Monday night because your thing kicks off tomorrow. Let's talk about Amplify Your Message and kind of how that evolved into where it's at and your main goal behind Amplify Your Message.
Yeah, so you kind of, in some ways, you hit the nail on the head in some of those areas of how it evolved into what it is. In fact, what we decided is, and I always don't mind sharing where inspiration comes from. So Pete Vargas, those listening who might be familiar with Pete Vargas, Pete put on a thing called Rise Up Challenge. And one of their students, our bLU Talk students, went to Pete's thing and came to me and said, Corey, I would love to help organize an event like this, but I don't have the network. But then she said, then I realized I do have the network within bLU Talks because, we're already hundreds deep, by the way, when you add up all 4 platforms, and we're just launching. So, she's like, you already have this platform. And I'm like, yeah, wait a minute, we do. And so her and I worked together and said, we need to run a bLU Talks event, virtual event. And so we planned the one that took place just last week. And we ran an event last week. And the message behind that, it's called bLU Talks Flip Your Script. And it was about changing your thoughts so you can change your life, essentially. And we had, by the way, Mark Victor Hansen on that one. And we had Anthony Trucks. You're probably familiar with Anthony. He's the NFL linebacker.
Yep.
He shares the bill with Brendan Burchard often. And so we had some really great speakers. And then we had some bLU Talk speakers and authors. And while we were doing that, I said, at the same time, I want to launch an event, and I want to bring together an event that hit all 3 areas that I focused on with my brand and getting my message out. And those 3 were, of course, podcasting, books, and basically speaking. And by the way, you mentioned earlier about the 3 sort of platforms that we're using within bLU Talks, but there's another aspect to it too, is we're leveraging the 3 strongest and most well-known platforms in their industry. So YouTube for video, Amazon for books, and iTunes for podcasting. So it's also, we're also looking, saying, well, now we can tap into all 3 of the biggest. And by the way, cross brand. So when you listen to the show, we can say, oh, and by the way, don't forget to go check out our new book or what have you. So, but having said that, the one element that we didn't have was virtual events. And I don't even know if we would have saw the need for it had the Corona situation not happened. But then when she came to me, and that was partly, Pete put his event together in 10 days because of COVID. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe we need to look at this. And the Amplify Your Message thing was my way of being a little more niched and focused around what I get, let's say, geek out on, which is how to get your message out in those 3 ways, those 3 methods. And so the book side of it, I'm 11 books in, even though I didn't read the first one until 27, my first book. And that was How to Win Friends and Influence People, because people will always ask, what book was it? And I forget to say it. And then podcasting, I started 8.5, 9 years ago. So those familiar with John Lee Dumas and how long he's been in podcasting, I started 6 months before John. And so that tells you how long I've been doing podcasting. And speaking, I've been speaking on stages and getting paid to speak on stages for 18 years. So I started teaching the speaking program. I started teaching how to land your TEDx and all that kind of stuff about 5 years ago. The other 2 I've been wanting to do for a long time. So essentially, it was my way to marry the 3 of them into basically almost like Brendan Burchard is his Experts Academy, so almost like an influencer academy.
Yep.
And I feel as an influencer, you can choose one of those areas and I feel, go deep into that one area, or you can say, I'm going to use all 3. And so really what this event is about is helping people learn from the best of the best, how to dive into any one of those 3 platforms or all 3. And so if I can tell people, Scott, who's involved, because, whether we like it or not, we're in a name drop society in the sense that people want to know, well, they want to know a context of what's the credibility, who are the people that I'm going to trust my time in, because we all only have a limited amount of time. So what we put together is a 3-day virtual event. The great part about it, it's like a conference essentially, in the sense that you can decide which stuff you want to attend. Now I say that I want you to attend everything, but I also am realistic and know that 11 to 7 Eastern, 3 days straight, is tough for somebody to commit to. So even if you can come in and out, do so. So essentially, it's first day is dedicated to authors, second day is dedicated to speakers, and the third day that you're on is dedicated to podcasters. And so the author day, just top of my head, and by the way,
you want me to pull up the website? I can share the website. You pull up and share the screen and share the website and walk through the speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. That works for me.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's like I say, it's essentially a way to marry the 3 different platforms and 3 different ways to get your voice out. And so I'll let you scroll down then if you want, Scott. So, I mean, this is just all the traditional, website stuff that you get to read through. If you want to keep scrolling down, might as well take people right to the day one. This is just all some of what you already heard just about my background. And I do, right there is the first one. I do have two co-hosts I'll mention as well. One is Kelly Filardo. She's actually on the screen right now. And Kelly's got an amazing story. She was a burn victim at age 2 and was told, like, she thought she could never share a message. And now she worked with us to get her TEDx talk. So she's a multiple-time TEDx speaker. But she also has a Goalcast video that's reached 10 million people and a documentary now about her story. And she's a 6-time best-selling author. So Kelly and I are co-hosting the author day. I'm hosting the middle day, and we'll go to those in a second. But the third day is a guy named Tim Allison, who I think you know Tim?
Yep.
So Tim is a 60-year-old podcaster in a small fishing village in Nova Scotia, in Canada. Started a podcast. He's only left the fishing village twice, and yet he's spoken on the stage at Harvard. He's interviewed Seth Godin, Jack Canfield, and again, he started at 60. So this tells you what's possible. So the first day is dedicated to authors. I'll just kind of pick and choose a few here, but Michael E. Gerber, who people can see on the screen, I think out of the names there, more people would probably know who Michael is because of the E-Myth business. E-Myth was a book that stayed on the New York Times list for 2 decades. You can't say that about many books.
Right.
And so Michael's going to talk about how he sold so many books. Beside him is a guy named Tyler Wagner. I think you know Tyler from New Media Summit.
I've been a part of a couple of his books as well too. So.
Oh, have you?
Yep.
Yeah. So Tyler's got a really cool niche of helping people land on the Wall Street Journal and USA Today lists. And that's a whole system on its own. And so he's gonna, and I'll tell you, I've interviewed Tyler about this before, and he actually reveals more than some people would say he should. Like he gives away the goods, and that's awesome to see that. Debbie Datchinger has been, Debbie as well, but she's been on First Radio, I think traditional radio for years, and she does both. She does the author side and the podcasting side, and she's crushing it at the highest level. She's also, as we mentioned, at the New Media Summit. So Debbie's going to talk about how to get ultimate visibility. We got John Mann. A lot of people wouldn't know him, but he's actually a co-author on a lot of major books. He co-wrote The Go-Giver. He co-wrote The Slight Edge, for people that are familiar with that book. He co-wrote a lot of really big books that people don't know about that he wrote. And so we're going to talk to him about getting a ghostwriter and why you would and all that kind of stuff. Last person I'll pick here is David Hancock. He's actually the founder of my publishing company. And so I thought, why not bring him on and talk about publishing? Because everybody always asks me, should I publish or self-publish? Right. And so we're going to be covering that, Kelly and I, during our presentation, but I wanted to bring David on and get the publisher perspective and how, if you want to be with a publisher, you can work with one effectively. So that's the first day, is all about getting your book out there. Second day is the speaker day. And as you can see, really big game changers here. Les Brown. I didn't choose to be the headliner. Les was actually the headliner, but we had to switch his spot today. So I had to bite the bullet and put myself as the final speaker because we just switched to my spot. But Les probably goes without introduction. Bob Berg, author of The Go-Giver, one of the best-selling business books around. Demo Casanova, right next to Les. A lot of people don't know Demo, but they will. He's a Grammy-winning producer. He's actually produced for people like Madonna, Jay-Z, Justin Timberlake. The interview I did with him last, we went to the Hip Factory in Miami, and he's like, oh, well, the Bee Gees were standing there when they told me to do this. He's getting some really cool stories. On the far left on the top, Heather Moyse, 2-time Olympian, who then made the transition into a speaker. But what's really cool about Heather, she didn't want to be known as a speaker, an Olympian who just got hired because she had gold medals. She wanted to be known as a speaker who just happened to have some gold medals. And that's very rare. So that's cool. And then if you scroll down a bit, we have Tasia Valenza, Emmy winner. We have John, and she's going to talk about how to give great voice. So she's a communications coach. So a lot of people love that. Rosalind Fung knows how to sell from the stage. She's going to talk about monetizing your talk. John, I'm really excited about. He's going to talk about how to double your income, influence, and impact through the power of relationships. You're probably familiar with John if you spend time with Les. John works with the likes of Les, Akon, Bob Proctor. And so this is a guy who knows how to connect at the highest level, and he's going to reveal that. So that's very cool. I don't know why I just noticed that my title, I got Les's talk title there, and mine, that's going to be changed. I'm going to be actually talking about how to land your branded talk. So how to land your TEDx talk or Blue talk. So that's what I'm covering. And then there's a third day. Hopefully I'm not taking too long to go through all this.
You're good, man. I think it's important because you got such a strong lineup. That's like, okay, let's get, it's part of the reason I said, like, let's get you on here as soon as possible because you got a strong lineup. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about everybody else. I'm honored to be on the stage with everybody out there. So yeah, continue.
Awesome stuff. Well, Nick Loper, I don't know, for a lot of people that are listening that are into podcasts, probably don't need much introduction. The Side Hustle show. Nick's been doing this for a long time. Ever since, almost since John Lee Dumas started, I've seen Nick around over and over again, everywhere, podcast movement, listen to his show regularly. And I'm like, I've interviewed him in the past. And I'm like, I need to get Nick on for this because I want to talk about niching. We've talked about this, Scott. Our focus on the podcast day is around how you can, and it doesn't have to be this, but how you can find your minimally viable audience.
Yeah.
So it's great if you want to have a million listeners on your show, but it's important to know you don't have to. And everybody keeps getting told in podcasting you need to. And you and I both know lots of people with a small number of listeners or a very niche number of listeners who've earned a very high level of income and impacted a lot of lives. Yourself, notwithstanding, yourself involved in that mix. And so that's part of what I want to do. And you're very niched. Nick Loper's very niched. Jeremy Slate, he's actually got a really big audience and not as niched, but he's got a niche thing about helping people get podcast interviews. And so I think that's a popular area for a lot of people. Kate Erickson, again, probably doesn't need much introduction. I told Kate I want to bring her on this time because I've involved John a bunch of times. I said this time I want to involve Kate. And we've already recorded Kate's interview. So she's one of the only one that won't be live. But we've already recorded the interview, so I know what's in there. And trust me, that interview alone will be worth tuning in.
I think Kate gets a better interview than JLD anyway.
There you go. You heard it here, JLD. But she crushed it, right? And she talked about everything, and she helped build that whole system, like the scaling side. So we talk about everything from scaling to, and this terminology, avatar, we use that a lot in podcasting. But for somebody who's just getting into podcasting, it's just your ideal listener. And so she dives into that, and she knows that as well as anybody. So yes, and not only that, one thing that's really cool, and this ties into the minimally viable audience, is that Kate also talks now about how if they were to start, today they already had to change, but if they were to start today, they couldn't do what they did with Entrepreneurs on Fire. So what they would do now is niche until it hurts. And they weren't as niche then, it was entrepreneurs that are excited, but they're now niching and they do master classes instead of the daily interviews. And she said now they realize that time has passed, so you have to niche now. So that's who's there. Who else? Heather Monahan was with Podcast One, recently moved on from there, but Heather's a mega influencer on LinkedIn. I think 70,000 followers on LinkedIn. Crushing it. And so she's got a lot of insight to share about how to get your message out there. And the one other one I'll mention is what's really cool. People might not recognize the names, but below Tom Ziglar, but Kevin Miller is actually the host of the Ziglar Show. And so him and Tom do the show together, but Tom kind of ducks in and out, but Kevin's the core host. And then Dan Miller, and I only discovered this at my Morgan James book launch, was Dan Miller's Kevin's father. And I didn't know that. Dan has a thing called 48 Days, which is a podcast and a whole brand. And he's a marketing guru. And he's up there talking, and he says, my son, when he's working on the Ziglar Show. And right in my head, I went, Miller, wait a minute, that's got to be Kevin's father. And so I thought, how cool would it be to get Tom Ziglar, Kevin Miller, and Dan Miller, the father and son, and Tom Ziglar, all on the show at the same time? And they've never done this interview together before, the three of them. And the reason I know that is because when I had Tom and Kevin on in the past, they told me they had never done the interview, just the two of them. And so I brought it up. I said, I want to interview the three of you. And they said, we've never done that before. So I think it's going to be fun. But the Ziglar Show is, one of those things where it's been built on this mega legacy of Zig Ziglar. But to your point, Tom's done a great job of keeping that legacy alive. And, our Facebook page, I think, has 5 million followers. And just as a note about how basic insight can be, when I was interviewing Tom one time when he had 200 and some thousand followers on Facebook, but he had 100 and some % engagement. Now, this is when Facebook was more organic, but that's not, as we know, that's not normal. And I said to Tom, I said, how do you do it? Can you give people tips? And he said, well, the first tip I would give you is to go to our Facebook page and watch what we're doing and copy it. And I thought, why do we normally think of that, right? We always think I need to get the nuggets from him. But the truth is you can see what they're doing. And what they were doing at the time, which won't work as well as it did then, was they were sharing powerful, known Ziglar quotes. Mm-hmm. And it was like the image quotes when that was the big thing on Facebook, and everybody was sharing them for them. So what it meant is they had more people sharing the quotes than people on their page. And now I think they're at like 4 or 5 million now. I think he told me the last time I talked to him, the engagement was about 20%. By the way, that's still high on Facebook.
Still ridiculously high. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So Tom's, I guess I say all that stuff because Tom is the real deal. And, I've had him on for an hour interviewing about speaking. I could put him in the speaking day in a heartbeat. And he knows how his father crushed it. He knows every nuance. He knows the greatest stories about how his father delivered, on a stage with all these other amazing greats, and yet got the highest reviews. But he knows that not just that his father did it, he knows what he did. And so I'm excited to dive into the podcast side with Tom and see what he's got to share there. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Of course, I don't have to mention Scott Carson because the viewers here know exactly who you are. But I mean, you can see the lineup is stellar. The secret speaker, that is technically, I think, filled, but we're waiting on the person to confirm they can make the time work. And so if not, I have a fallback person. But because a couple of people thought when they saw the secret speakers that we're not going to announce them. It's just that we didn't get the confirmation yet, so we don't want to put it on the page.
Right.
So that's the event in a nutshell. It's basically 3 days of learning from the best of the best. And again, even if you only tune in for certain times of this, consider the fact that it's free. If you could turn into a conference like this and get inside the mind of a Les Brown for a half hour, there's nothing like it. So I'm super stoked, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, and so am I. I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's a double barrel of goodness on all 3 days, and the schedule works well too. Publishing the schedule, giving people the opportunity to be able to, okay, let me schedule this into my schedule, work around what I've got going on. But that's the thing. It's online. You got people in now. Are people going to be able to ask questions of the speakers, or is it all? I mean, besides Kate, obviously being pre-recorded, I think you said one other thing. Is it going to be a little bit interactive with people, being able to ask questions of all the speakers and connecting with people?
Yeah, 100%. So how we structure it, and we're doing it on Facebook Live. I did this for the last event last week. I might switch this, who knows? I mean, next time around, not this time. But we did it on bLive, and I liked the flexibility of it. I love Zoom, but Zoom, there's a lot more things going on at once. And with what we're doing here with having backstage speakers waiting for the next time around, we would have had to have a lot more infrastructure on the Zoom side. So we're using bLive. But having said that, what's really great is that everybody has about 30 minutes roughly, whether it's an interview or whether it's a presentation, and then we're leaving like 10 to 15 minutes for questions. And so we're going to say before they start or while we're doing the interview, if you have questions for Scott, post them here. And then what we do is at the end, we'll go to those questions. And I have some that have been submitted to me as well already for people that can't make it. So I have that in the barrel if we don't get a question, because you just never know, right? So, but typically, like last week we did it, I would say most cases we had about 4 or 5 questions for each person, but it's on Facebook Live. So what that means is you can watch there and literally right in the comments right below, you can ask any question you want. And so we tackled every question last week. We didn't leave one question unanswered. And I'll add one last little thing, and this is a maybe, but I'm going to say a likely. We got to fit it in tomorrow if we're going to do it. But I did an interview recently with Mark Victor Hansen for another event, and I asked them if I can grab a spot from it where him and I dialed into how he helped sell 600 million books. And I'm gonna give a teaser here, which I shouldn't, but I'm gonna. But I'll tell you, one of the things that he talked about that him and Jack dialed into that most people don't even know the term is bypass marketing. And this is one of the ways that they made chicken soup such a phenomenon. And I'll just give you a hint about that to explain that to people without going into, because he gives stories and he triggers ideas. But if you think about this, chicken soup for the golfer soul. What would every other person that writes a book do? They would try to get it into Barnes & Noble. What did Jack and Mark do? They got it into the sports pro shops. You're bypassing the bookstore, going to the people that are golfing to buy books for golfers. And they did that with everything. And if you just learned that concept from Mark tomorrow, we're going to probably run 15 minutes of his interview. If you just learn that concept from Mark tomorrow, you've got your free money's worth. The money you did spend's worth. So yeah, you can tell I'm going to be on fire for the next 3 days.
Well, even with Mark getting 15 minutes of content, like he can squeeze 30 minutes into 15 minutes as fast as he talks, but absolutely his energy and everything out there, and everybody on there. I mean, all great people, all people that have a big heart to give and really help others avoid the minefields or the bear traps that are waiting for us all out there, but also doing amazing things out there, really sharing their messages and growing their audience, and a lot of it doing it pretty pretty damn organically by just being consistent on a daily basis. You know what I mean? And doing so many great things out there, right, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, for those that are listening here that are into, say, podcasting, I'll tell you, and you probably get the same questions, but I'll tell you, just give you a hint, because one thing I didn't cover there is some of the stuff we're going to cover, because Tim and I are going to do a presentation on podcasting, Kelly and I on authorship. I'm going to do it on my own on speaking around the TEDx thing. But, for example, people ask me when I started out, how did I get land a spot, let's say an interview with Jack Canfield, as an example, especially when I started out, because Jack wasn't doing a lot of podcasts back 7 years ago. And so people ask me, and I won't go too far into it, but I'll say it was about leverage. And I'm going to reveal the story of what exactly I did creativity-wise to get that spot. And I'll tell you how it started out, Scott, and you'll appreciate this as a fellow podcaster. I was told by his office he turns down 9 out of every 10 interviews and expect a no. And I did something very specific, very creative, and that was how I secured it. They came back the day after I did the creative thing and said, Jack said he'll do it. They didn't know, neither of us discussed what I did, but they said Jack will do it. And what I was able to do then is the person that I leveraged to get Jack on and Jack together, I was able to leverage the two of them to get the next big guest. And so I'm going to dial into how I did that with podcasting, because whenever I got Jack on, little known secret, I hadn't launched the show yet. So I had 0 listeners to tell Jack. When they asked how many listeners, I had 0 listeners. So to get Jack Canfield on, that's pretty tough. And then on top of that, to finish that story, when it finally aired, and this was just kismet, if you will, when it finally aired the day before, he was on a rerun of Larry King Live. And 2 days later, or a day later, he was on Super Soul Sunday with Oprah. And in between, he was on my tiny little show that was on the second episode. But how I did it was it was leveraged. And so I'm going to dial into how you can leverage. And by the way, you can use this in podcasting, speaking. You can use it writing books. What I'm going to teach there is I'm going to talk about how I did that stuff. And there's definitely nothing special about me. You heard my beginnings. And, I talk on the author side about how do you get big name endorsements. And, people want it. This, I don't know about you, but this is the things people ask me all the time. How'd you get so-and-so in your show? How'd you get so-and-so to endorse your book? And I'm going to peel back the onion. So that's what I'm planning to do, is talk to people about how you can go from 0 to 60 in a shorter amount of time. We both said it's not going to be overnight, but a shorter amount of time.
I love it, guys. And if you're watching this live, the link is in the Facebook Live, in the description to get it. And I mean, you're giving away tickets for people to attend versus a normal $297 price. I mean, there's upgrades if people want to upgrade to a VIP pass and replays and things like that. But really giving people an opportunity, get rocking and rolling. So looks like Raven Blair Glover says hi to both of us there. Hey, Raven, how's it going? Raven, the talk show maven, as we both know her, right?
Absolutely. I was just talking to Raven via Facebook today.
There you go. And then if you're listening to this, the link to the access is also in the description there for you guys. But, I mean, 11 to 7 Eastern time, right?
100%. And I will say this, too. If you decide to sign up, and basically what will happen is then we'll send you an email so you know when things are running, but we'll be sending out the full schedule tomorrow. And then the Facebook group we're running it, I'm going to post the schedule this evening. So you'll be able to see who's where. I mean, you can also go to the website if you want to piece it together that way, obviously, as well. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be like the idea behind offering it for free is because this is the stuff that I wish I would have had when I started. Yeah. And and as you said, there's an upgrade to the recording, but we're talking the lifetime access to the recordings is $47. Like we're not talking like, because I don't want people to go and think it's going to be like $1,000 to buy the recordings. Really, at the end of the day, if you think about it, it's just to cover the cost of uploading the videos, and then you have to have a website to store it on. So I use Teachable, and that's not free. So it's just a matter of can we offset that cost a bit. But truly, my hope is, and this is my goal every time I speak, every time I do a webinar, is I want some people, now not everybody's going to do this, but I want some people to walk in there not knowing what they're expecting, and then to walk out and actually be able to use what they learned and say, wow, I never spent a penny with that guy, and I was still able to do stuff in my business. And I'll give you an example, if I can, of a cool scenario where that happened. It's a guy named Woody Woodrow, and Woody Woodrow, not his real name, is Alex Woodrow, but Woody got stuck as his middle name and his nickname. Woody is a co-founder of the band Our Last Night, which is, I didn't know this. I had no clue about this, so I'm not saying like I'm in the know, but 3rd largest independent band in the world.
Wow.
I think they have like 400 million views on Facebook or on YouTube. And where I met him was actually at Lisa Nichols' conference. And I saw him go up on stage and he said a few things and I'm like, I need to connect with this guy. I just feel a certain, an energy here where this guy would be great on a future podcast episode or something. And long story short is Woody presented last week at our event, but he actually signed up for my TEDx program because he wanted to deliver a TEDx talk. He also signed up for a masterclass that we did, which was an entrepreneurship masterclass. Anyway, why I bring this up is Kelly and I were on it. So the same Kelly is co-hosting with me. Woody goes on, watches the bonus video, which I wasn't even going to release. We did 4 videos, I promised. I did a 5th one, brought Kelly on for 15 minutes. She teaches a bestseller strategy that involves pre-orders. I don't want to give away her goods, but she teaches a unique bestseller strategy. Woody watches it and goes, okay, I can do that. He didn't know Kelly could be hired. He would have hired her. He didn't know she could be hired to do it. He just said, okay, she just taught it. 15 minutes is what she spent. He gave us a testimonial the other day for the launch of a program where he said, I basically watched Kelly and Corey on this thing, took what they said, and his book was on Amazon, #1 for 2 weeks, which is, that's not an hour, and 20 categories. A lot of people don't really pick that many, but he stayed in the top of 20 categories, not one in every one of them. But the point is, all he did was spend 15 minutes, and he took what he learned in 15 minutes. That's my goal, is somebody walks away and says, what this guy taught for free, just like Brenda Burchard does, what this guy taught for free, I can actually apply in my business and see results. Mm-hmm. So that's part of why I wanted to do this.
Yeah, I love it. And, I always like to, when I go somewhere where there's a summit or a conference, walk away with a nugget or two that I can apply immediately. And knowing the speaker set you got there, yeah, people are going to walk away saturated with things. They better take really good notes. If they don't buy on the replays, right, Corey?
100%. And I will add too, I mentioned it earlier, I know, but a lot of times people are worried. It's funny and virtual. You wouldn't think people would be worried about is it okay if I come in and out? But we've had 4 or 5 people just this week say, is it okay if I sign up and just come in and out? Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is, if you don't comment, I won't even know you left and came back. But the point is, I would rather you be there for 3 speakers than 0. That's the bottom line. And so the great part about being virtual is you don't have to worry about walking into the room and everybody turning over to look at you. So
amen to that. I mean, I had hosted a virtual event on Saturday, and I got one coming up this weekend, a 3-day as well too. And people show up when you've got a schedule. Hey, show up what's going to be the most valuable to, where you need the most amount of help with, where the biggest focus is, or where your biggest passions lie, and that makes it a whole lot easier to fit in, especially if people are still working from home with kids and spouses and things like that. We're here in Austin, they just extended the stay at home till August again, which is kind of, I know, crazy here. So I don't mind being holed up with 24 of my good friends online for a couple of days.
Third story. Well, I'm where I'm at right now, because again, I think we all sort of surfaced back to where we normally are based. And I'm right now in the East Coast of Canada, which it's tough for me because I'm used to traveling back and forth throughout North America. But I'm holed up right now. And where we're at, though, it's an island, so you can't get on unless they test you. We've stayed firm at 27 cases and 27 recovered for about a month now.
Very nice.
So we're almost all completely open back up. So yeah, I mean, so every place is different right now, right? And yeah, I mean, there's like New York, I don't think is opening for a bit yet. And I mean, I'm curious as to when it'll all come back together and when as a unit we can all say, okay, now everything's open. But the online world has opened up to us in a way it never did before. And to be honest, this is something I don't think I've shared really in interviews recently. This is only like the summit I did last week was my first virtual event ever. Like this wasn't even in my radar because I was so busy with everything else. And now we've already planned this is going to be every 2 months. So the COVID, it opened that door for us. I mean, it's not a good reason that opened the door. I mean, it's not good that we had to have that open the door for us, but it opened that door for us to be able to offer this to people. And I think people need light more than ever before. I mean, it was really important to me that every speaker that's coming in, it's not getting caught up with what's going on in the world right now. These speakers are going to talk about how you can get your message out there in a big way, and people need your message more than ever before. I don't know if we're finishing up, but I'll leave one thought with people as another Zig Ziglar-ism. And I heard this story that, and I think it was through Tom. Yeah, it was actually. Zig called into the office to his assistant. By the way, she's still with them. I think it's 40 years now she's been with them. He called into the office and he said, I'm curious how many testimonials we have. And she started counting them, and this might blow people's minds or not, but she had to call him back. She said, Zig, I can't count them. There's too many. So what she started doing was weighing them by 50 at a time to figure out how many they had. And he said, what I also want to know is, he said, I want to know what the most common phrases and things you're hearing. Because what he was just trying to figure out is where he's impacting people's lives. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part is he found out that it was almost always starting through his books. And apparently that's not what he would have thought. He would have thought it would have been on the stages. So he's really surprised it started through the books. And to my understanding, this is the only part of the story I'm not sure if I understood it correctly or not, or I'm paraphrasing. But my understanding is that's where he came up with the quote that if you have a message that people need to hear, it's your moral obligation to find a way to deliver it to them. Even if that means promoting a book that you have. And so that it's my moral obligation to tell people about this event, but also it's a moral obligation for all of us to share messages that could change lives.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. I love it. Totally agree with that guy, man. That's why we were glad to have you on. That's why we made some changes, because I was like, no, let's get you on before the event versus halfway in the middle on a Wednesday night. Let's have you on a Monday night and get it done. So I know you've got a lot. Say what, Corey?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I appreciate you doing that, because now, as I showed you, I was just switched on the schedule to the last speaker on Wednesday. So that would have meant I would have been on my last one, end of the day, and then jumping right on yours, but I would have still been there.
Yeah, no, I know you would have, but I'm like, I know how it is before an event. So guys and gals who are listening and watching, click on the link in the chat roll. If you need us to email you, we're glad to email you the link on there too for you. If they can't click on it, the website best way to go into is what's the best website, Corey, for them to go to?
Oh, Amplify Your Messages. The key thing there is the S on the end, amplifyyourmessages.com. It's one of the few times I couldn't get the website I wanted, which was amplifyyourmessage.com. So just remember to put the S on the end.
Amplifyyourmessages.com. And we'll put the link in the show notes, link in the Facebook page, link in the YouTube video as well for you guys, and then also in the email that we send out with the replay link to everybody that's RSVP'd for it. So, Corey, I'm going to let you get back to your hopefully get a little sleep tonight and recharge for a very busy couple days for you. But thanks so much for coming on. And once again, thanks again for making it not only an awesome event, but also making it affordable for any type of budget for people out there as well too for you. That's important these days.
It's absolutely my pleasure. This is what I live for. In some ways, I feel I feel bad that I get to do this. You know, even when it's free, I still feel bad that I get to do this, because I'm just so blessed that I get to live what I feel is my passion. And so, yeah, I'm happy to do it. But I also, in some ways it's selfish, because I feel like I'm guilty that I'm so happy doing it. I'm so happy giving this stuff away for free, because, by the way, I dig, and I mentioned earlier, geek out. I geek out on learning from the best of the best. And so these next 3 days, I get to learn from the best of the best. So believe it or not, I'm a student too in the next 3 days. Yeah. But yeah, so my pleasure, and thank you for agreeing to be a part of it. You're going to be a big part of it. I can't wait till we get to Thursday and get to talk about niching and podcasting.
Sounds good, brother. Have a good evening, man. We'll see you online here in the next couple of days, right, brother?
Awesome stuff. And thanks, everybody. I so appreciate all of you for tuning in. I noticed that I didn't have good lighting tonight, so I apologize for that. But I'm here.
Thanks, great everyone. Stuff. There we go. All right, hey, everybody. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of Note 9 in America / Mass Media Podcast Mastermind. For you guys out there, take the opportunity, go to amplifyyourmessages.com or use the link in the description to get your pass to the next 3 days. All you need is to hear one nugget to make it worthwhile your whole weekend and really help you change your message. Like you said, whether it's writing a book, speaking, starting a podcast, getting booked on podcasts, there's a lot of great things that you're going to learn from over the next couple of days. So Montrese says, thanks, Corey. And thanks for listening here, Montrese. Thanks for everybody that was on here tonight. And for those that are watching it, otherwise, we'll see you at amplifyyourmessages.com.